Covering Dunkirk, Fredonia, and all of northern Chautauqua County, this is WCVF 88.9 FM, The Voice.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Big Blue Sports here on WCVF 88.9. I'm Matt Volz, a senior at Fredonia. Your host for today's show. Got a lot to talk about today. Of course, the Bills. What a start to the season on Sunday night with an unbelievable come-from-behind win to defeat the Baltimore Ravens and start the season 1-0. Of course, the Bills on the road on Sunday to face the Jets. We'll talk about all of that later, as well as taking a look at week 1 of the NFL season. There were some pretty good games, a couple of teams who looked rough. I'm looking at you, Miami Dolphins. And, of course, Fredonia sports as well. Men's soccer team off to a very good start this season, sweeping the weekend's Blue Devil Classic tournament here on campus over the weekend, and they are 3-1-1 through their first 5 games. We'll talk about all of that later. For the first bit of the show, it's going to look just a little bit different today. As I did last year, anybody who might remember, last fall, I also had a show that was on September 11th. And what I want to do is what I did last year. I kind of went through and, there are some, as horrifically dark of a day as it was, there are some stories of heroism that day that are stories that should definitely be told. And some of those relate to sports in sometimes very interesting and powerful ways. So I mentioned a few of those last year, and we'll talk about that as well. It's a day today that I think is a little bit hard to describe. So for anybody who might not have seen the news yesterday that happened, Charlie Kirk, who was a political activist, he was a very close ally of President Trump, one of the leading voices in the conservative political movement. He was speaking at an event at Utah Valley University yesterday. And while he was on stage, he was shot and he did not survive. And there's a lot of you check social media, there's a lot of emotions, a lot of back and forth going on. And what I'll say about it, and I really won't spend too much time on it. I mean, this is a sports show primarily, but Charlie Kirk was an individual who I very strongly disagreed with. I found many of his views to be horrific, evil, deplorable, pretty much any adjective in the book. He stood for the exact opposite of a lot of the things that I stand for. And I very, very strongly disagreed with him. He was not a person I respected. That being said, this was a person, and my thought on it is no matter how much I disagreed with his views, no matter what I thought of him as a person, the fact that in 2025, somebody in the United States is losing their life for expressing their opinion, no matter how horrible and hateful that opinion may be, it's concerning. And it's something that in this country should not happen. It's, again, I made this point several times yesterday after the news broke, and I'll make it again. This was not an individual who I agreed with. This was not an individual who I respected. But he was an individual, and he did not deserve to lose his life the way that he did. And the thing that sort of sticks with me, and this is all happening against the backdrop of today being September 11th. It's, I thought about his family. I thought about he's got 2 young kids, and these kids are now going to grow up without their father. And his wife has lost her husband. His parents have lost their child. And again, even if he's someone who you strongly disagreed with, it's still, I guess the way that I could put it is, I follow Dean Withers on social media. He's in his early 20s. He is, again, he's one of the leading voices of the, liberal Democrat youth movement, so to speak. Dean was somebody who actually came face to face and debated with Charlie, or attempted to debate with him, on multiple occasions. And Dean was on a live stream yesterday when the news broke that he had died. And Dean was in tears. Again, this was a man who was essentially believed everything that was the opposite of what Dean believed. And Dean still recognized it for what it is. It is a tragedy. It's a tragic event. Doesn't matter if you didn't care for the guy. It's a horrible, horrible event. Nobody deserves to have that happen to them. Nobody. And one thing that I sort of thought of this morning was, and I was, looking through TikTok as I was sort of trying to organize my thoughts about all this, was, again, somebody who, like me, very strongly disagreed with everything Charlie Kirk stood for, did not respect him in the slightest. And this person said something to the effect of, you can't champion free speech in this country if you're celebrating the death of someone when their death was caused by them expressing free speech. Again, doesn't matter how horrible you think the speech was. He was talking about he was asked about how many transgender mass shooters there have been. And again, he had views on the transgender community that I found to be absolutely deplorable, sickening, evil. And he said many things that I thought were disgusting and terrible. But that being said, this is in no way, and it feels like it shouldn't even need to be said, this is in no way a celebratory event. Take the political views out of it. Take any of that out of it. This is a man who lost his life in a particularly horrific way in front of his loved ones. And again, I'll say it 1,000 times. I didn't agree with him. I didn't respect him. He did not deserve to have that happen. And my hope is that this turns into somewhat of a wake-up call in the sense that people realize, okay, we have to do something, and we can't keep we can't keep this perpetual hatred going. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this all happening against the backdrop of today being September 11th. September 11th is always a heavily emotional day. It was not a day that I lived through. I was born in 2004. But I know a lot of people who did. Everybody who was everybody who was around and is old enough to remember knows exactly what they were doing when they first heard of the attacks on whether it was the World Trade Center in New York City, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., or Flight 93 with the passengers revolting and the plane crashing in a field in Pennsylvania. Everyone sort of, and we've all heard the stories that so many of our loved ones have told. I still remember one story that I think of was my mom. My mom, who just retired from being a middle school counselor in the same school district for 27 years. She's told me the story that she had gone into the main office to make a copy of something, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mom, I know you're listening. And she had seen a couple of the other adults and administrators huddled around, because this was back in 2001. There weren't like flat screen TVs everywhere like there are now. But they were kind of huddled around a TV, and my mom walked in and saw that the World Trade Center was on fire. And if I remember correctly, she stood there and watched as, live on TV, the second plane crashed into Tower 2. And a lot of people were watching live when that happened. Some students were watching live in school. It was the superintendent's office, by the way. And I've heard a lot of those stories like I said, I was born in 2004. I was not around for 9/11. But my two older sisters both were. One of my sisters, that was about a week before her first birthday. She doesn't remember it, needless to say. But for my oldest sister and for my cousin, September 11th, 2001 was their first day of preschool. And this is something that will always, always stick with me. It was their first day of preschool. And instead of that day being, such a really cool, starting preschool, how exciting is that? Instead, it turned into such an awful day. And in the stories that I've heard from my parents, because it was on the TV everywhere. It didn't matter what channel you were on. It was on, and whether they were showing, rescue workers digging through the rubble of the World Trade Center, I should say, or they're showing a replay of either of the two towers collapsing, or whether it was, showing the Pentagon on fire, or showing the plume of smoke coming out of the field in Pennsylvania, or maybe it was later that evening when World Trade Center Tower 7 collapsed. It was everywhere on TV. And my parents have told me the story that my oldest sister, again, first day of preschool, and she was particularly bothered by all of the TV clips and all the news clips showing, as the towers collapsed, you could see just this giant wave, this giant rush of debris going through Manhattan. And there were people running from it. It was I mean, it looks, and again, I didn't live it, of course, but seeing the video of that, I mean, it looks like it is straight out of some sort of dystopian horror film. But it was real life. And my parents have always told me that they remember my sister was so bothered by seeing people running from the smoke that eventually they had to make the decision to turn the TV off. And my mom's always told me that while it was so difficult to turn the TV off, because how could it not be? How could it possibly be easy to go about your normal everyday life when you know that in New York City, thousands of people have lost their lives? Whether it's in New York City, Washington, Pennsylvania, thousands of people have lost their lives, and thousands of others are either mourning the loss of their loved ones or wondering if their loved ones are okay. And there was just, it was a lot of unknown. And my mom's always told me that it was, you know, her and my dad felt guilty turning the TV off, but they were parents first, you know? And I remember my mom's told me this story on a few different occasions that sometimes, even though it's hard, sometimes you got to turn the TV off. And it is sometimes impossible to do that. I found myself struggling with that yesterday when I was watching the news and I was watching CNN and they were talking about how Charlie Kirk had died. And it's something that you're trying to process and watch. And again, I'll say it again. I did not agree with the man. Absolutely no way that he deserved to lose his life. And it's a disgusting, horrible thing that he lost his life. And I really do feel for his family, his loved ones. He was a person. He was a person I disagreed with, but he was a person. And I guess it's just, I think the best piece of advice that I can give to anybody who might be listening, if you find yourself getting particularly caught up, and I think this is even more true now in the world of social media. I mean, I find myself sometimes scrolling through Twitter or TikTok and just constantly being bombarded with negativity, the awful thing. There's a lot of awful things going on in this world, and that's absolutely true. And it's a horrible thing to feel. And it's hard to turn away from that. You feel guilty turning away from that. But at the same time, sometimes the instance comes where you've got to take care of your life at home first. And I've always thought about that. That is one of the stories of 9/11 that has always stuck with me, was my mom talking about how they felt horrible turning the TV off, but they had a responsibility at home. They had to take care of their own lives. You know, for my parents specifically, they had 2 young kids to take care of. But for other people, you know, and you can kind of tie it into what's going on now and what's going on today. Even before Charlie Kirk was killed yesterday, all of the violence going on in the world, whether it be everything going on between, you know, everything going on in Gaza with horrible human rights violations, and there being a genocide over there. I mean, just say what it is. You know, the constant school violence that happens. We had, again, the irony of it, we at Fredonia, we had a lockdown drill on campus yesterday morning. And again, it was, you know, it was a drill. It was, you know, requirement, like regulations. You have to do it. You have to practice this stuff. It had been announced to us like 2 or 3 weeks ago. But still, I couldn't help but think yesterday, it's like, we should not have to do this. And we do, because that's the world that we live in. So I guess this is just sort of shouting into the void. But we should not have to do this. Nobody should go to school in the morning and wonder if they're going to go home that afternoon. Nobody should go to work and wonder if they're going to still be alive at the end of the day. That should never be a thing. Never. And in a country that is so founded on the basis of freedom for all, liberty for all, it's terrifying that this still happens. I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, I'm just a 21-year-old college kid who is sitting in front of a microphone doing an hour-long show about sports. Like, in the second half of this show, I'm going to talk about how the Buffalo Bills, like, could have given me a heart attack on Sunday night against the Ravens. So it's like, I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know that I'm equipped to come up with the right answer. And on that same level, this is not a problem that only one person is going to be able to solve. This is something that is going to take everybody coming together. And I think in the world that we live in, which sometimes feels more and more divided by the day, it is so crucially important that we show unity in times like this. And that's something that was very prevalent in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. It was a horrific event, and it brought people together because it forced people to take a step back and think about what really matters. There's a song that I absolutely love that was written in the aftermath of 9/11. It's a song by Alan Jackson, and it's called "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?" The whole song is sort of about different perspectives of, again, this idea that everyone knows where they were when they first heard about the attacks. And he sings about how love is so crucially important. And a thing that I've sort of thought about throughout the day is that thing like, and I'm not exactly sure how I want to word it or what I'm trying to say, but these things that happen that are so tragic, whether it be the attacks on our country 24 years ago this morning, whether it be, students in schools who are losing their lives when they should be in a safe place to learn, or whether it be yesterday when a political activist lost his life for expressing opinion. It's a scary thing, and what all of these have in common, all of these events were fueled by hatred of some kind. And again, in a world that is so deeply divided and feels more and more divided every single day, it feels all the more important, at least to me, to shift away from that mindset of hatred and disdain for one another. You can disagree with one another. You can strongly disagree with one another. In fact, that's part of what makes the United States what it is the fact that this is a place that fuels healthy and honest debate. That's a good thing. Debate is a good thing. But when debate crosses the line into hatred, that's where we have problems. And I think that's something that really needs to be talked about and be remembered, is that it sounds somewhat corny, but love is far more important than hate. Hate doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't get us anywhere. It doesn't do anything productive. Love brings people together. Hate brings people apart. And we live in a world where there's a lot of bad things happening. That's true. You can't get away from that. That's true. And to some extent, that's probably always going to be true. That's just how reality is. But at least in my opinion, the more love that can be shown across the board, the better. And to me, there are no exceptions for that. The people who I strongly disagree with, the people who I don't think are very good people like Charlie Kirk, are people who still need to be seen as human beings who are still deserving of an opportunity to express their opinion, no matter how much you disagree with it. And I very much did. This is not a place where we can focus on hatred. That's only going to lead us down a bad path. I really think it is so important, especially now, to focus on positivity anywhere you can find it. Love anywhere you can find it. And it can be small. But I think it's so important to really focus on love rather than hatred. I also wanted to, before I take a break, and it's been a half hour, I apologize for my long-winded talk, but I mentioned last year, and I mentioned earlier in the show, some of the incredible acts of heroism that were displayed on 9/11. And I wanted to mention some of them. I was watching a mini documentary yesterday about a young man named Wells Crowther. So Wells Crowther was formerly a Division I lacrosse player at Boston College. And after graduation, he was working in New York City, and he was an equities trader, but he had wanted to become a firefighter. And he actually was a volunteer firefighter in his hometown when he was in high school. So Wells that day was working in the World Trade Center. His office was in the South Tower when it was hit. So the South Tower was the second one that was hit and also the first one that collapsed. So there were a great deal of people who were in the sky lobby of the South Tower, which was on the 78th floor. They were the Tower 1 had already been hit. Tower 2 had not been hit yet. So they were kind of waiting. They weren't really sure what had happened. And then the second plane hit their building. And a woman told the story that it was there was the wing of the plane had ripped a hole that had gone a couple of floors high. And in this particular lobby, this woman talked about how a man, she didn't know who it was, stood up and said, "Everybody who can stand up on their own, do so now. Find one person, help them, and follow me." And he led them down stairwell A, which was the only operational staircase at that point, and led them down to the 40th floor where there were operating elevators that were able to take people down to ground level and evacuate. So he led them all down to the 40th floor, and everybody got on the elevator and was able to evacuate. And this particular man decided to go back up. He went back up to the burning floors, found more people, came back down, made sure they evacuated, and went back up again. Just before 10 a.m., the tower collapsed. That man was Wells Crowther. And he was known for, when he would play lacrosse, he always wore this red bandana. And there was a story that was published in the newspaper a short while after the attacks that they interviewed this woman. And Wells's parents at this point, they did not know what had happened to their son. And this woman talked about how a man with a red bandana had gone upstairs into the flaming building and had saved her life and the lives of several others. And they immediately knew it was their son. That's the type of heroism that happened that day. That's the type of love that needs to be more common and shown more in the world. There's a couple of other stories that I want to tell. There's a man by the name of Tony. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce his last name, but Tony worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, which was on the upper floors of, I believe, Tower 1 of the World Trade Center, but I could be wrong, and I horribly apologize if I am. Cantor Fitzgerald was actually the company who had the most casualties as a result of 9/11. So Tony worked for them. He did not go to work that morning because the New York Giants were on the road. The Giants were in Denver playing Monday Night Football against the Broncos the night before the 9/11 attacks. Tony flew to Denver to see the game because he was a Giants fan. And so Denver's in a different time zone. They're 2 hours behind Eastern time. So when Tony first woke up in the morning, he called in, or he attempted to call his office. Couldn't get through to him. And he wasn't really sure what was going on. And so he turned on the TV to find that the attacks had taken place. And he knew his office was not there anymore. So Tony, later that week, Tony called the Giants. And he left a voicemail for their head coach, Jim Fossil, and general manager, Ernie Accorsi. Tony left a voicemail that the basic gist of it was, I am alive because I'm a New York Giants fan, which was true. Tony would have been at work that morning if the Giants were not playing in Denver. If he had not gone to that game, he would have been in the office. And he very well may not have survived. That's, again, the power that sports can sometimes have. And he left that message for the Giants. And Tiki Barber actually talked about it once, and he said that there was not a dry eye in the room when they listened to that voicemail. The next Sunday, when the NFL resumed play, they didn't that following Sunday, but the week after, the Giants were in Kansas City, and they beat the Chiefs. And one of the coolest pictures I've ever seen was the Giants in the locker room after they won, with every player, coach, executive, everybody wearing something that honored the Fire Department of New York, the New York Police Department, Port Authority, any of it. Incredible. I should also mention that the Jets, New York City's other NFL team, they also won their first game after 9/11. They beat the Patriots in New England. And one of the Patriots' offensive linemen, Joe Andruzzi, he actually had some family who were in the fire department. His brothers were New York City firefighters, and his father was a retired New York City policeman. All of his brothers and his father, they all survived that day. And when the Patriots hosted the Jets in the first game after 9/11, all of them were honorary captains. And there's an iconic scene where Joe Andruzzi ran out of the tunnel with American flags in each hand, running onto the field. I should also mention, it's a total side note, ironically, that was also the game where Drew Bledsoe got injured and Tom Brady stepped in to become the Patriots quarterback for the next 2 decades. So just a little interesting footnote, but yeah, that's true. There's a lot of stories of September 11th as they relate to sports that are, there's tragedy and there's heroism. And I think it's important to remember the tragedy, honor those who lost their lives, but also remember and honor the heroism. And again, if I can leave with one message, because I've now talked for 40 minutes and have missed 2 breaks, the overall focus really of today, I think, should be about just showing love to everybody you come across. Hatred doesn't have any sort of a good place in this world. Hatred doesn't do any of us any good. So I encourage everyone to show love in whatever way they can today, and every day. But, just come together, and respect everyone. You don't always have to like everyone, and that happens. But I think it's just so important in our divided world to kind of show that we're together. Because I can tell you, anybody who is an enemy of a certain group doesn't stand a chance when that group is united. And that's sort of what this country's supposed to be. It's what we were founded upon. We're supposed to be, we are the United States of America for a reason. We're supposed to come together in the face of darkness. We're supposed to be the light for everybody who seeks freedom in the world. And I really do hope that someday we can get there. I don't know if we will, but I really hope we do. And I'm not gonna stop trying to get there as much as I can. So we're gonna take a break because it's now 12:42, and I've talked way too long about this. We're gonna talk about Fredonia sports, the Bills beating the Ravens, of course, and the NFL in week one. Thank you all for tuning in today. Again, I told you this is a different show than what we're really used to. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I'll be back in a few to talk some football and bring back some normalcy to Big Blue Sports. So thanks for tuning in today on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. And welcome back to Big Blue Sports on WCVF 88.9. Thanks, everybody, for listening to all of that. I know it was rather long-winded. I promise we will actually talk about Fredonia sports now. But first, are you ever bored on campus? Do you ever want to just get up and explore town while having fun? There's no better way than with Rockin' the Commons coming later this month on Saturday, September 27th. This event runs from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and is hosted by the lovely Fredonia Radio Systems here on campus. That's us. There's nothing better than to take a stroll downtown and enjoy family activities, raffles, live music, and more. Can't wait to see you there. And, of course, should mention that our annual Rockin' the Commons event, the proceeds all benefit Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo. So I mentioned on the topic of Fredonia sports, I mentioned at the top of the show that the men's soccer team is off to an excellent start this season. They are 3-1-1 through their first 5 games. Took home wins in both of their Blue Devil Classic games over the weekend. A 3-1 win over Alfred University on Friday and a 3-0 win over Bryant and Stratton on Saturday. They are back in action this weekend. They have a 1 p.m. game at Alfred State on Saturday this weekend. Women's soccer team picked up their first win of the season yesterday, a 2-1 win at home over SUNY Geneseo. They actually tied both of their games in the Blue Devil Classic, a 2-2 draw with Utica and a 1-1 tie against Cuca. They are 1-2-2 on the season. Volleyball back in the win column again this week with a 3-0. They sweep Thiel College in 3 sets to pick up their second win of the year. Volleyball team 2-3 on the year. They are headed down to Pennsylvania to face a few different teams in a tournament that starts with a 6 p.m. match against Penn State Behrend on Friday. Men's and women's cross country underway as well. They had a meet last weekend at SUNY Brockport, and they've got a few meets left on the schedule. They're actually off this weekend before both teams will head to the University of Rochester for a meet there on Saturday, September 20th. And the annual Carr Hall Memorial Invitational is right here on Saturday, October 4th. That's always a very fun day, and again, honors a remarkable member of the women's cross-country program. Carr Hall was a runner for a number of years, was tragically killed in an accident after she had graduated from Fredonia, and this invitational honors her memory every single year, which is a really fantastic event, and it's one that has grown a lot over the last few years. Again, I've mentioned before that, you know, my freshman year, I remember there were only about 3 or 4 teams who were here for that invitational. Last year, I think there were close to 20. So it's really impressive to see. And finally, women's tennis is 0-4 so far in the fall season, falling 6-1 at Houghton yesterday. They're back in action this weekend on the road against Oswego on Saturday at 1 p.m. So that is a look at your Fredonia sports. Now let's talk about the Bills, because holy cow, what a win. And I do wish that I was able to talk a little bit more about this game, because holy cow, it was a game. The Bills' run defense was just gashed. I mean, Buffalo did a horrific job at stopping the run. The defense was continuously gashed by Derrick Henry. He ran for 169 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Lamar Jackson threw 2 touchdowns, ran for 70 yards. The Bills gave up 238 yards on the ground, 8.2 yards per carry. That's not good. Josh Allen, though, the man is inevitable. The Bills were down 40-25 with less than 4 minutes to go. They are the first team ever in NFL history to be trailing by 15 points in the final 4 minutes of a game and win the game in regulation. Nobody had ever done that before the Bills did it on Sunday night. Just an unbelievable win. Buffalo trailed 40-25 after a long Derrick Henry touchdown run. The Bills also actually scored on their opening drive. Buffalo trailed 40-25, and it was huge that Ravens rookie kicker Tyler Loop missed the extra point on that touchdown. He hit the upright, so it was 40-25. The Bills put together a 10-play, 80-yard drive, capped off with a Josh Allen pass that was tipped by Dawson Knox and caught by a diving Keon Coleman for a touchdown. By the way, that was the best game Keon Coleman has ever played in his career. I fully believe that. And I think the same can possibly be said for Ed Oliver, too. So the Bills scored. They kicked the extra point. It's 40-32. On the Ravens' next drive, Derrick Henry, who had just crushed the Bills all day long, Ed Oliver, who had a monstrous game on Sunday night, Oliver forces a fumble. It's recovered by Terrell Bernard. The Bills get it in prime Ravens territory, and they cap off the 30-yard drive with a 1-yard Josh Allen touchdown run. The Bills go for 2 to try and tie the game, and it falls incomplete. I think there should have been pass interference, but it doesn't matter. The Bills force a 3-and-out. The Ravens punt. Some people think they shouldn't have punted. It was 4th and 3 in their own territory. I mean, it's a tough decision. The Bills drive down the field, 9 plays, 66 yards, and in the final seconds, Matt Prater, the oldest player to ever play for the Buffalo Bills at age 41, who was just signed to the practice squad on Thursday before the game, Prater hits the game-winning 32-yard field goal. The Bills win it 41-40. And, by the way, I had this thought come across. So, of course, the comeback against the Ravens, the Bills formerly held the greatest comeback in NFL history. Of course, the playoff game in January of 1993 when Frank Reich led them back from a 35-3 deficit to beat the Houston Oilers. The game-winning field goal in that game, 32 yards. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of cool that it was the same distance. Prater was actually signed to the 53-man roster, as was punter Cameron Johnston, and punter Brad Robbins was released. The Bills are on the road against the New York Jets on Sunday at 1 p.m. I don't have enough time to make my picks for across the NFL, but I will say that I do think the Bills are going to win on Sunday. I think the Jets looked really good against the Steelers, looked very good, so I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think that the Bills are able to get the win, and I think we see a little bit better from their defense. Well, it's hard to believe, but that is all we have today for Big Blue Sports. Again, I know it was a different episode. You know, the first while of the show was a little bit heavier subject material, but I think it was important to talk about. And I just want to thank everybody listening, not only today, but always listening to the show. And again, as I said earlier, just love everyone, you know, and love in any way that you can. And, you know, just remember what's really important in life. And that's kind of it. We will see you back here next week. Thanks for tuning into Big Blue Sports. We'll catch you next week. Go Bills.